Chapter 2. The City and the Sea. Morning did not arrive all at once. It came in slow layers of light, peeling back the night one veil at a time. The stars faded first, and then the eastern sky paled from indigo to gray and on to the faintest wash of rose above the distant sea. Mist lifted from the forest in thin white ribbons, and the air grew colder against Varren's skin before turning soft again, as though the world itself were drawing one long breath before it spoke for the first time. Varren Morwyn had never seen a sunrise. He did not know what to call the colors spreading across the sky, or the way the clouds, thin as breath, caught fire and turned gold along their edges. He knew only that something in his chest ached as he watched, as if a door he had never known existed had quietly swung open. The pale wolf stood beside him on the stream bank, its fur silver in the dim light, amber eyes half closed. It did not look at the sky. It watched the forest behind them. "Do you ever look up?" Varren asked quietly. The wolf's ear twitched. "Of course," he murmured. "You know better than to be distracted." He tore his gaze from the horizon and knelt by the water. The cut along his ribs had stopped bleeding, but the dried blood had stiffened his shirt and cloak, and he cupped the cold stream and washed the wound, hissing softly as the chill reached the raw skin beneath. No golden eyes stared back at him this time, only his own pale reflection and the white feather pinned against his chest by the leather strap of his harness. Still, the memory of that vast golden pupil opening in liquid darkness would not leave him. It had been like the glimpse in the pool within the crystal cavern, sky where stone should have been, except that this had been no trick of reflection or fatigue. Something had looked back. Something beneath the cliffs of the city ahead. He dipped his hands again, more roughly now, splashing water over his face until the sting of cold forced his thoughts to stillness. Then he rose, tightened his belt, and checked the clasps of his cloak. The dark blade and the pale blade rode at his hips, a familiar weight beneath an unfamiliar sky. "Come," he said to the wolf. It did not move. It watched the trees one heartbeat longer, sniffed the faint breeze flowing down from the mountains, and growled low in its throat. Only then did it step away from the stream and fall in beside him. They walked, and the forest changed as the light grew. Shadows shortened and colors unfolded. The gray shapes that had been only softer darkness in the night became trunks of rough brown and black bark, undergrowth crusted with frost, small white flowers peering out from between the stones like shy eyes. Everywhere there were sounds. Birds called from the high branches, each voice different from the last, and leaves rattled together as the wind moved through them. Water rushed beneath the earth where the stream cut into a hidden channel, and somewhere far off a hollow crack echoed as ice broke from a distant cliff and fell into unseen depths. In Nyssara Deep, sound had always been small and close, the scuff of boots on stone, the slow drip of water, the bells. Here it went on, carried by air that no wall or ceiling could ever catch. Varren moved quietly out of long habit, placing his boots where the leaves lay thickest, where roots could bear his weight without snapping, skirting the patches of loose stone and listening for pursuit even when there was none. Old habits did not die simply because the sky had changed. Once, through a break in the trees, he saw the mountains behind them, a jagged line of dark stone capped with snow that burned pink in the growing light. Somewhere in that sharp crown of peaks, hidden like a wound, lay the crack through which he had climbed. Nyssara Deep was invisible from here, yet he could feel it still, like a bruise beneath the skin of the world. He did not let his gaze linger. Ahead, between the trunks, a warmer glow began to take shape. Not sunrise, something lower and flickering. "Fire," he whispered. The wolf's head lifted. They crested a small rise and saw it. A road of pale, packed earth running north to south, curving around the side of the forest and down toward the glittering line of the sea. Along it moved a small caravan, 3 wagons with green-painted sides drawn by shaggy horned beasts with patient eyes. Lanterns hung from poles at the corners of the wagons, their flames still bright in the half-light. Smoke drifted from a cook fire near the ditch, where a man in a wool cloak tended a black iron pot, and another figure, shorter and rounder, sat on a crate beneath a canvas awning, counting something into a small wooden box. Voices drifted up the slope, laughter and a snatch of song in a surface tongue. Varren knew only from smuggled books. Aurenfall's traders. His heart struck once against his ribs, hard enough to hurt. People. Not nobles in carved halls or guards in matched armor. Not miners bent beneath their quotas or stoneworkers laboring under watchful eyes, but people in colors, people who sang while they worked. He swallowed. His fingers twitched toward his hood, then stopped. Nyssara cloaks were uncommon on the surface, but not impossible. He had seen the drawings and heard the muttered boasts of smugglers who had gone above and come back with strange food and stranger stories, and the trick, they always said, was to move as if you belonged. Fear would betray him long before his skin did. He looked at the wolf. Its fur shimmered faintly in the dawn, almost the same color as the mist, and its eyes caught and held the light like pieces of amber glass. He had no idea how the caravan might react to a creature such as this. "Stay in the trees," he murmured. "If they see you, they will be afraid." The wolf stared at him. "I know," Varren said. "I am afraid too." He reached out, hesitated, then rested his hand lightly on the wolf's neck. The fur was colder than he expected, not the cold of stone, but the cold of high air and fresh snow. The wolf did not pull away. It waited, patient as the mountains. "If I do not return," Varren added, "follow the stream to the coast. There will be cliffs." There will be. He thought of the impossible bell beneath Aurenfall. Bells. The wolf's ears twitched once at the word. Then, without a sound, it stepped backward into the undergrowth and was gone between the trees, only the faintest rustle of leaves marking its passing. Varren was alone. He took a breath, adjusted the fall of his cloak to hide the hilts of his blades as best he could, and walked down toward the road. The nearer he came, the more the details resolved. The man at the pot had a beard streaked with white and a face lined from years of squinting into wind and sun, and his cloak was patched at the shoulders and knees, though the patches themselves were fine and carefully sewn. The shorter figure beneath the awning was a woman with dark hair braided over one shoulder, her fingers quick as birds over stacks of coin and paper. Their beast snorted softly as Varren stepped out of the tree line, and 3 heads turned toward him, 3 pairs of eyes going wide. Varren stopped a dozen paces from the nearest wagon and lifted both hands away from his sides. "I mean no harm," he said. The words tasted strange in his mouth, like a song learned from paper. The bearded man reached for something behind the cook fire, a staff banded in iron, while the woman's hand darted beneath her cloak and came up with a small crossbow already half raised. "Stranger," she said sharply. "Name and road." "Right." Varren blinked. "Road, right. You walk on Lord Rhysand's land. All who use his roads pay tithe or carry writ. Lord, land, tithe, writ." He knew the words, but not layered together in this way. "I have no writ," Varren said, "and I have nothing worth tithing." The bearded man snorted. "Your cloak looks worth something. The cloak stays." It came out more sharply than he intended, and both traders stiffened at once. His mistake. He stepped back and forced his shoulders to ease. "I am sorry," he added quickly. "It was a gift. I am not used to sharing gifts with strangers." The woman's gaze moved over him more carefully now, his boots, his half-hidden blades, his pale hair tangled and unbound from the night, the color of his skin, neither the deep bronze of southern sailors nor the ruddy hue of northern farmers. Her eyes lingered longest on his ears, slightly pointed and shadow-borne sharp, and on the faint white line along his jaw where an old scar had faded. "You're not from around here," she said. "No." "Where from, then?" He hesitated. The truth would mean nothing to them, or worse, it would mean far too much. "South," he said at last. It was not a lie. There were tunnels that ran farther than any map admitted. "South," the bearded man repeated. "That's all. I left in a hurry. I did not have time to measure every step." To his surprise, the man barked a short laugh, and the crossbow lowered a finger's breadth. "Name," the woman said again, less sharply now. "Varren." She studied him a moment, then nodded slowly, as though deciding the name told her nothing useful one way or another. "Plain enough," she said. "Though a man who gives only half a home and half a name tends to be running from the other halves." "I have done many things," Varren answered. "Running is only the most recent." The bearded man laughed again, despite himself, and the woman fought a smile and mostly won. "My mother was kind," Varren said, though no one had asked, "and my father is dead." The words landed heavier than he expected, and a silence settled over the little stretch of road. The bearded man looked away first, uncomfortable, and the woman's eyes softened just a little. "I'm Mysa," she said. "This grumbling stump is Bren." Bren grunted something that might have been a greeting and stirred the pot, sending up a fragrant cloud of steam. Food. Varren had not truly understood how hungry he was until the scent reached him, onions and root vegetables and a hint of meat all boiled together into something warm and alive, and his stomach twisted on itself. Lysa noticed. "When did you last eat?" Varren considered the bells of Nyssara Deep, the chase through the tunnels, the climb, the forest, the stream. "Before the third bell," he said. "Whose third bell?" Bren muttered. "Does it matter?" Lysa snapped. "A hungry man is a hungry man." She studied Varren one moment more, then slung the crossbow back onto its strap and jerked her chin toward the fire. "Sit. You can share breakfast. In exchange, you answer a few questions. Fair." Varren nodded. "Fair." He crossed the last few paces and lowered himself onto an overturned crate near the fire, the heat on his face making his eyes sting. Bren ladled thick stew into a wooden bowl and handed it over with a spoon carved from pale wood, and Varren accepted it with both hands. He forced himself not to devour it, taking small, careful bites as the steam curled around his face. The vegetables were soft, the meat stringy but rich, the broth salted in a way that woke every nerve inside him. It was not mushroom bread or cave fish roasted over smokeless coals. It was better. It tasted like open air. "So," Lysa said, settling herself on the crate opposite him, "where is your road taking you, Varren, from the south with only half a story?" Varren looked past the wagons. Down the road the land rolled gently, fields and hedges breaking the forest into ordered patches, and beyond that the ground fell away toward a distant rim, the line of the cliffs. Above that rim, faint in the morning haze, rose the white shapes of towers. And beyond them he imagined waves striking old stone, bells, lanterns, a golden eye opening in the dark. "Aurenfall," he said. Bren choked. Lysa swore. "What for?" she demanded. Varren weighed the truths he could not give her, to vanish among strangers, to learn why something beneath their city watched him, to find work that did not involve burning the food from the hands of hungry children. "I need a place to start," he said instead, "a city where I can be another face in the crowd. I have skills. I can track, scout, guard. I can read. I can listen." "Can you keep your head down?" Bren asked. "Because Aurenfall is not a place that smiles kindly on trouble right now." "Why?" Lysa and Bren exchanged a glance. "You really came from nowhere," Bren muttered. Lysa leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Aurenfall is restless," she said. "There've been storms all winter. The sea is strange. Nets come up empty one day and full the next, full of fish no one's ever seen, with eyes too big and teeth like needles." Varren thought of the golden eye beneath the stream. "And the bells?" he asked. "Which bells?" Bren said. "The lighthouse, the harbor, the temple." "The one that should not be there," Varren said quietly. "The one beneath the cliffs." Wind rustled the canvas of the wagons, and the beasts shifted their weight and snorted, their breath pluming in the cold. "What did you say?" Lysa whispered. "Last night," Varren told them. As the stars faded, a bell rang from under the sea, one note, deep and old. He broke off, the memory sliding over his skin like cold water, the same note echoing up through stone as he climbed out of the wound in the mountain, and the word that had followed it. Oathbreaker. It was not a harbor bell, he finished. That's not funny, Bren said. I am not trying to be funny. Lysa swallowed. There are stories, she said slowly. Songs, really. Old ones. They say there is a bell buried under Aurenfall, a bell from before the city, before the towers, before the lighthouse. From when the cliffs were temples and the sea was something people still remembered how to fear. Stories, Bren said, as if the word alone could make them harmless. Stories do not ring, Varren murmured. Lysa's fingers tightened around her bowl. You heard it. Yes. And you still want to go there. Varren looked down at the dark blade and the pale blade at his sides, and the old choice his mother had named came to him again, quiet beneath everything else. If the sea is changing, he said, I would rather stand near the place where it began than hide in a forest and wait for it to find me. Lysa stared at him. Bren whistled softly. Mad, Bren said. He's mad. Which might be a kind of courage, I suppose. Or a kind of doom, Lysa muttered, and the word slipped out more easily than she had meant it to. It hung in the air between them, heavier than the steam and the stew and the morning mist. Varren took another slow bite, considering. If Aurenfall is dangerous, he said, why are you going there? Lysa blinked. Because we have to eat, she said simply, and because danger pays better than safety, and because not every story ends in drowning. Some end in coins and contracts and everyone getting home alive. She smiled then, quick and sharp. Besides, we have writ. She reached into her cloak and drew out a folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper sealed with green wax, marked with a sigil of 3 waves and a tower. Lord Risson's blessing, she said. Trade passage to and from Aurenfall. Any bandit or overzealous guard who questions us can go argue with his steward. You, however, she looked him over again, have nothing, no writ, no letters, no money, no story that anyone on the road will recognize in a way that helps you. Varren nodded. That is correct. You really are honest, Bren muttered. Lysa chewed her lip. We could take you on as a guard, she said. In name, if not on paper. Tell the road watcher with us. You look like you know one end of a blade from the other. But if the city has reason to be nervous about men without homes or histories, we'd be the first they question for bringing you in. She was right, and Varren would not ask strangers to risk their livelihood for him. I understand, he said. You have already given me food. I will find another way in. There might not be another way that doesn't end with you in a cell, Bren pointed out, or under the harbor with the barnacles. Bren, Lysa snapped. What? Should I braid the truth into flowers for him? Varren set the empty bowl down carefully. What if I earned your risk? Lysa raised a brow. How? By guarding you, truly, not just in name. The deep roads teach more than quiet feet. I know how to listen for the things that hunt. I know how to see danger before it steps into the light. There are no deep roads up here, Bren grumbled. Only ditches and poorly maintained bridges. Danger does not care what the road is made of, Varren answered. He turned his head slightly, and the forest behind them shifted at his senses, not with sight, but with the old memory of how sound flowed through tunnels, how the air changed when something large moved where it should not. He listened. Wind, beasts. The creak of wheels as the wagon settled. The small clink of Lysa's coins shifting in their box. And beneath all of it, faint and far, another sound. Hooves, many of them. Someone is coming, he said. Bren snorted. Yes, it's a road. People tend to come and go on roads. From the north, Varren continued. 6, maybe 7 riders. Heavy. Wearing more metal than sense. Lysa frowned and looked up the curve of the road. For a moment she saw nothing. Then, faintly, a cluster of dark shapes appeared, moving in formation, the horse's breath smoking in the cold. City watch? Bren asked. Too far out, Lysa replied. And they'd be flying colors. Those men are hiding theirs. Her mouth tightened. Bandits, Varren suggested. Worse, she said. Collectors. Collectors of what? Debt, or excuses, or people. Depends which story you believe about Lord Risson's friends. She snapped the writ closed and shoved it back into her cloak, then began moving with quick, precise energy. Bren, pack the fire. You, Varren, if you mean what you said about earning your place under our wheels, now is when you decide. Varren rose. What do you need? We need them to believe we are not worth bleeding, Lysa said, and failing that, we need not to die. She glanced at his blades, then at his ears. Can you look less like yourself? He thought of Nyssara Deep, where everyone wore their house upon their skin like a brand. No, he said. Then we'll convince them you're supposed to look like that. She reached beneath the awning and pulled out another cloak, this one muddy brown, stained with old travel and patched at the elbows. Put this on over yours, hood up. When they ask, keep your eyes down and your mouth shut unless I kick your foot. You're a hired sword from the south who doesn't speak much. Aurenfall trade, understand? Yes. Good. Bren, move the crates, make us look smaller. Bren grumbled but obeyed, stamping out the cook fire and kicking dirt over the embers while the beasts snorted and stamped, and he moved among them murmuring soothing nonsense. The riders drew closer. Varren pulled the rough cloak over his own, feeling its weight settle like a disguise that did not quite fit, and lowered the hood until the world became a narrow frame of road and wagon and sky. Bells rang in the distance, not the ancient note from beneath the cliffs, but harbor bells, clear and bright, counting out the morning for the city he had not yet reached. The riders trotted into view around the bend, 7 of them, just as he had guessed. Their armor was not uniform, pieces of chain and plate layered over thick leather, but the black and green cords on their shoulders matched. None bore banners. Yet the sigil on their cloaks was the same as the one on Lysa's writ, 3 waves and a tower. Lord Risson's men, or some version of them. The leader was a lean man with a narrow beard and clever eyes, his horse better fed than the rest and its tack polished, a long sword at his hip and a coil of dyed green rope hanging from his saddle horn. He reined in a few paces from the front wagon and looked down at Lysa. Morning, caravan? Morning, Captain, Lysa replied smoothly. Varren kept his gaze on the road and listened. That's Lord Risson's mark on your wagons. It is, and I have his writ in my cloak. Of course you do, the captain said. All good, honest traders who come through this stretch of road have Lord Risson's blessing. The trouble is, some of them forget that blessings need renewing. He smiled, slow and sharp. Lysa's shoulders stayed relaxed. We paid at Greenwood Ford 3 days ago. The ink on the steward's ledger is still wet. Yes, the captain said, but that was before the bell rang, wasn't it? The words slid through Varren like a blade. Lysa's fingers tightened on the edge of her cloak. I heard nothing, she said lightly. The captain's eyes narrowed. We did. All of us in Lord Risson's service. Woke us in the middle of the night, one deep note from under the sea. The priests call it an omen. The harbor master calls it a fault in the cliffs. Lord Rissson calls it an opportunity. An opportunity to what? Lysa asked. To tighten his hand. Strange bells mean strange times. Strange times mean higher risk. Higher risk means higher cost. And cost, Lysa of the green wagons, means you owe more for your blessing than you did 3 days ago. There it was. Not bandits, not exactly. Varren did not need the halls of Nyssara to recognize greed-wearing law-like armor. My writ is sealed, Lysa said, her voice still even. It guarantees passage for this journey, this cargo, and my crew. The captain leaned down, cutting across her. Your writ is worth as much as any other scrap of paper, unless the men with swords agree it means something. Bren shifted beside the second wagon, his grip tightening on his staff. The other riders watched, hands resting easy on weapons that could be drawn in less than a breath. Lysa's gaze flicked once toward Varren. Not yet. Captain, she said coolly, I am a small trader. I profit in handfuls of coin, not chests. If I pay you more now, I pay my crew less, and they do not like that. They are large men with strong arms and poor tempers. Her eyes moved toward Varren, deliberate. The captain followed her gaze, and for the first time his attention settled fully on the shadow-born beneath the rough cloak. "You've taken on new large men." "He's quiet," Lysa said, "and cheaper than most." "Is he now?" The captain nudged his horse forward, hooves clopping on the packed earth until the animal's warm breath puffed across Varren's hood. Varren kept his eyes on the dust and counted his heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. A gloved hand reached down and caught the edge of his hood. "Let's see what Lord Rhysand's roads have picked up today," the captain murmured and yanked. The hood fell back, and the light struck Varren's face full on. For a moment no one moved. The captain's eyes widened, then sharpened. "Lower lands," he said softly, "or deeper. I've seen your kind in tavern corners, but not often this far from the harbor." Varren did not answer. "Can you speak, boy?" "I can." "Good. Then tell me why Lord Rhysand should suffer someone like you walking his roads, when the sea is ringing old bells and the priests are muttering about omens." "Because I am walking toward the danger," Varren said quietly, "not away from it." The captain laughed. "You hear that? We've found a hero." A few of the riders chuckled. He turned back to Varren. "Heroes are bad for business. They get ideas, they make promises, they forget there are men who built these roads, and men who pay to keep them safe." "You mean men who own them," he said before he could stop himself. Lysa's jaw tightened. The captain's smile thinned. "You have a tongue on you. I suppose wherever you crawled out of, people forgot to cut it." Varren let the insult pass. He knew how quickly words could be sharpened into blades. "Captain," Lysa said, "he's just a sword with boots. If you have a quarrel, it's with my purse, not my hireling." "Oh, I have a quarrel with both. Your purse is too light, and your hireling is inconvenient." He straightened in the saddle. "Here is my offer. You pay the new rate, and you hand over your shadowborn to stand watch at the cliffs for a 10-day. Lord Rhysand would sleep easier knowing something like him is where he can keep an eye on it." Lysa's face went pale. Bren cursed softly. Beneath the cloak, Varren's fingers brushed the hilts of his blades. A 10-day at the cliffs, under the lighthouse, above the place where the golden eye waited. Every instinct in him said to refuse, to turn and run into the forest, to vanish between the trees before these men could wrap their greed around his fate. But running had brought him here, and the bell had followed. Lysa stared at him, and in that single heartbeat Varren saw the calculation moving behind her eyes. If she refused, they might take more than coin. They might drag her and Bren and the wagons back to whatever cold hall Lord Rhysand used for counting debts, might take the writ, the beasts, the fragile thread of her life that stretched from one trade to the next. If she agreed, he would be alone on the cliffs, alone with the bell. The choice did not belong to her. It belonged to him. Varren stepped forward. "I accept." Lysa's head snapped toward him. "Varren, I will stand watch," he told the captain, "for a 10-day, on the cliffs, under the lighthouse, wherever you want me. In exchange, you let these wagons pass without further tithe." "And if I decline?" the captain asked, amused. "Then you deal with a hungry man with sharp steel and nothing left to lose." Varren did not raise his voice. He did not move his hands. But something in the way he said it made a few of the riders shift in their saddles. The captain studied him. Up close his eyes were not cruel, only careful, weighing risk the way Lysa weighed coins. "Honest and mad," he said at last. "The priests are right. Strange times." He looked to Lysa. "You'll sign that he offered. So when he decides he'd rather jump than stand, no one comes crying to me." Lysa's mouth flattened. "I'll sign." "And you," the captain added, turning back to Varren, "will report to the cliff watch by dusk. There's a path down from the east gate, and the harbor master will know where to put you. if you try to slip past the city walls instead." He shrugged. "Lord Rissen's men are not the only ones who can hear a bell." Varren inclined his head. "I understand." "Good. Then we are all in agreement." The captain wheeled his horse around, and the riders followed, hooves drumming the road as they headed south toward the sea. Lysa waited until they had rounded another bend before she let out a long, shaking breath. "Idiots," Bren muttered. "We're all idiots." "You should have let me speak," Lysa snapped at Varren. "I could have talked him down to coin only. Maybe. Possibly." "Would you have taken that bargain?" Varren asked. She glared at him. "Yes. Because I am not in the habit of handing strangers over to the cliffs no matter how shiny their blades." "Then you would have paid him," Varren said. "And the next time the bell rang he would have asked for more and more until your wagons rolled on a chain instead of wheels." Lysa opened her mouth, then closed it. Bren rubbed a hand over his face. "You don't even know what you've agreed to. The cliff watch is not a postman line up to take. They say the ones who stand it go strange in the head. They hear things in the waves, see lights in the water that aren't there when anyone else looks." Varren thought of the golden eye beneath the stream. "I have seen worse places." "Have you?" Lysa demanded. "Yes," he replied, "and I would prefer not to see them again." He pulled the rough cloak tight around himself and lifted the hood. "Take the road," he said. "Reach the gates before noon. Do not stop for anyone else who wants to sell you their fear." "What about you?" Lysa asked. "I will walk with you, at a distance. If the captain is watching from the hills, he will see me keeping the bargain." "And if he isn't watching," Bren said, "then his greed will still pull him toward the cliffs. Men like him do not pass up the chance to own someone else's courage." Lysa stared at him a moment longer, then shook her head. "Fine. But when we reach Aurenfall, you find me. We'll be in the lower market by the harbor wall, under the green awning with the cracked lantern. You owe me a better explanation than I like standing on dangerous rocks." "I will find you." "See that you do." She clapped her hands, shouted at Bren, and in a flurry of ropes and curses, the caravan lurched into motion again, wheels rattling over the ruts, beasts heaving their bulk into the harness. Varren walked behind them, a shadow trailing green wagons toward a city that did not yet know his name. The road to Aurenfall descended through farms and wet meadows before climbing again toward the cliff wall, and as the sky brightened, more people joined it. Farmers with carts, fishermen carrying nets, children wrapped in blankets, old women clutching bundles of herbs and prayer charms. Everyone was moving toward the gate, and everyone was afraid. Varren kept his hood low and walked near the back of the wagon party, but it did not help. People stared. Some whispered. Some pointed. A boy no older than 10 stared at his blades until his mother pulled him close and hissed, "Do not look at him." Varren looked away first. In Nyssara Deep, fear had been polished and controlled, turned into ceremony and law. Here it was rougher, messier, more honest, and he was not sure which was worse. The wolf did not show itself, yet Varren knew it was near. Once he glimpsed a flash of pale movement between the trees beyond the road. Once a dog beneath a wagon began to bark, then crawled backward and hid. At last the eastern gate of Aurenfall rose before them, taller than Varren had expected, built of pale stone streaked with moss from the sea air. 2 square towers flanked the entrance, and above the arch, carved letters read, "Aurenfall stands while the sea endures." The deep bell rang beneath the city, and a crack split through the stone under the final word. One of the guards cursed and stepped back. Somewhere unseen, the wolf growled. Lysa went very still, and so did the guard captain waiting beneath the arch, a broad man with a gray beard and armor polished too clean for a quiet morning. "Lysa of the Green Wagons," he called. "Your writ." Lysa handed it over with a steady hand. The captain broke the seal, read, then looked past her, his gaze settling on Varren. "Who is that?" "A hired guard," Lysa said. The captain's face hardened. "No. You have not heard why I hired him." "I do not need to hear why." "He saved us from collectors on the road. Lord Rissen's men. Men wearing his colors." The captain's jaw tightened. That answer had weight. "He is Shadowborn," he said. He is also standing under a cracked gate while bells ring beneath a city that has no deep bell," Lysa replied. "So perhaps today we judge people by usefulness before ancestry." The captain looked as though he would rather swallow glass. Before he could answer, another sound came from the road behind them, a horse screaming, wood cracking, a woman shouting for help. Varren turned. A wagon had overturned near the bend below the gate, broken crates scattered in the mud, cloth and onions, and salted fish in clay jars spilled across the road. A man lay near the ditch clutching his shoulder. A woman stood before 3 children with a kitchen knife trembling in her hand. Around them moved 5 figures in rust-colored cloaks. Bandits, Varren thought. Surface thieves. Then one of them turned, and his fingers tightened around the hilt of his dark blade. The man's eyes glowed gold, not bright like fire, not warm like candlelight, but gold like something buried deep beneath old stone. The bandit stood too still, his mouth hanging slightly open, rainwater dripping from the edge of his hood, and he did not blink. "Please," she said, "take the horses, take the wagon, just let the children go." The bandit tilted his head, the movement slow and wrong. The deep bell rang again, and all 5 bandits turned toward the city at the exact same instant. The children began to cry. Varren moved before he had decided to. He came out from behind the caravan, low and fast. The first bandit heard him at the last instant and turned with a short sword, half raised, too slow. Varren struck him behind the knee with the flat of the pale blade, caught him by the collar, and drove him face first into the mud. The second swung a hatchet, and Varren stepped inside the blow, seized the man's wrist, slammed his hand against the wagon frame so the hatchet dropped, and kicked it away. "Run," Varren shouted. The woman only stared at him, at his silver-gray skin, his pale hair, the curved blades in his hands, and fear crossed her face. Not fear of the bandits, fear of him. "Run." He shouted again, and that broke her stillness. She grabbed the smallest child and pulled the others toward the ditch. The third bandit drew a bow. Varren saw the arrow rise and knew he would not reach the man in time. The wolf did. It struck from the roadside mist in a flash of pale fur and teeth, and the bowman vanished beneath its weight while the arrow snapped loose and flew harmlessly into the trees. The fourth bandit came at Varren with a sword, and this one was stronger than the others. The blade came down hard enough to numb his arm when he blocked it, and pain tore through his ribs as he gave ground, his boots sliding in the mud. The bandit's face was empty. No anger, no hunger, no fear. Only gold light moving behind dead eyes. Varren turned one strike, ducked another, and cut across the man's chest with the pale blade. The edge sliced through cloth and leather, but no blood followed, and the bandit did not so much as flinch. Varren's stomach tightened. Not alive, he thought, or not fully. The fifth bandit rushed him from the side with a knife. Before Varren could turn, a crossbow bolt punched into the mud between the attacker's feet, and a woman's voice cracked across the road. "Drop it." The bandit did not drop it. He charged. A rider in a dark green cloak swung down from her horse near the gate road and fired again, the bolt taking the bandit in the shoulder and spinning him halfway around, yet still he kept coming. The rider's eyes widened. What in the storm black? Varren threw his dark blade. It turned once in the pale morning light and struck the bandit's wrist with the heavy curve of its guard, and the knife flew away. The woman drew a short sword and hit him hard across the temple with the pommel, and he dropped into the mud. The road went still. Only the overturned wagon wheel kept turning. Click, click, click. The rider looked at Varren. She was human, perhaps 30, with sharp brown eyes and black hair braided close to her head, a weathered badge shaped like a gull pinned to her cloak. She reloaded her crossbow without looking down, every motion practiced and calm, her gaze moving from his face to his blades, then to the wolf, then back to his face. "Step away from the family," she said. Varren slowly retrieved his dark blade from the mud. "I just saved them." "I saw." Her crossbow came up again. "That was not what I asked." The wolf's lips peeled back from its teeth. Varren held out one hand. "Easy." The rider's eyes narrowed. "You command that thing." "No." "Does it command you?" Varren glanced at the wolf, which stared at the woman as though weighing the flavor of her bones. "Not yet." Despite herself, the rider almost smiled. Almost. Then one of the fallen bandits moved. His head lifted, gold light burning behind his eyes, and the woman with the children screamed. The rider spun, crossbow rising. The bandit opened his mouth, and a voice came out that was not his. Gate of stone. Another bandit twitched. Blood of shadow. A third whispered from the mud. Starless throne. The deep bell rang again. All 5 bodies shuddered. Then the gold light went out of their eyes, and they collapsed as if every string holding them upright had been cut at once. The rider did not move for several breaths. Then she looked at Varren. "What did you do?" Varren stared at the bodies. "I arrived." "That is not comforting." "No." The wounded man by the ditch groaned, and the sound seemed to remind the rider of who she was. She lowered the crossbow a fraction and moved to him, tearing open his sleeve to examine the wound. Not deep. Hurts worse than it is. She looked at the woman. "Take the children and stay behind me." The woman nodded quickly, still watching Varren. The rider glanced at him again. "You have a name." "Varren Morwyn." "Of where?" Varren hesitated, and the rider noticed. "Of where?" "Nyssara Deep." The woman with the children made a sign against evil. The rider's jaw tightened. "Shadowborn." "Yes. We do not get many of your kind on this road. I imagine not. When we do, trouble tends to follow." Varren looked toward the fallen bandits. It was already here. The rider did not answer. From the city below, other bells began to answer. High bells and harbor bells and watch bells and alarm bells all at once. And as she turned toward the sound, Varren saw fear crack through her guarded expression for the first time. "There is no deep bell in Aurenfall," she said. Varren looked at her. "You hear it. That does not mean it exists. Things do not need permission to exist." Her eyes flicked back to him. "What are you, philosopher or fugitive?" "Yes." That time she did smile, only for a heartbeat, and then it was gone. "I am Elira Wren, road warden of the Eastern Gate." She pointed toward the fallen bandits. "Those men came from the city." The wounded merchant shook his head. "No, from the old mill road. They stepped out of the fog, did not speak, did not ask, just started breaking everything." Elira crouched beside one of the bandits and pulled back his collar. There was a mark on the skin beneath his ear, a circle cut by a vertical line. Varren leaned closer. "Careful," Elira snapped. "I have seen that shape before." She looked up. "Where?" Varren thought of the old carvings in the deepest tunnels beneath Nyssara, places even the council avoided, places where the stones seemed to drink the torchlight. "Below." Elira's mouth tightened. "That is becoming a very unpleasant word." The wolf walked to the edge of the road and stared toward Aurenfall. Another bell rang, this one not from below but from the city wall, and then another and another. Elira stood. "We need to move." "The family?" Varren asked. "I'll get them through the gate." "And me?" She looked him over. "You are bleeding, armed, shadowborn, traveling with a giant wolf, and somehow tangled up with men whispering about a starless throne." Varren waited. Elira slung the crossbow over her shoulder. "So obviously I should leave you alone on the road." "That would be easier." "I do not get paid for easier." She turned toward the city. "You come with me." Varren glanced toward Lysa, who stood beside her wagons, pale but steady. "Lower Market," she said. "Green awning, cracked lantern. Do not forget." "I will not." Bren looked at the wolf. "Does that thing eat stew?" The wolf stared at him, and Bren swallowed. Never mind. Varren followed Elira through the gate, and Aurenfall struck him like a storm. Sound crashed from every direction, wheels over stone and voices shouting and doors slamming, gulls crying and distant waves hammering the cliffs below. The smell was worse. Bread and fish and tar and smoke and rain and horse dung and hot iron and salt and perfume and sweat and fear, all tangled together in the narrow streets until he almost forgot to breathe. Nyssara Deep had been vast but controlled. Aurenfall was alive. It climbed the cliffs in layers of white stone and green roofs, rope bridges connecting the upper balconies, lanterns hanging from iron hooks shaped like gulls and sea serpents, stairs rising between crowded houses, market streets twisting down toward the harbor. And everywhere the bells rang, some by human hands and some by no hands at all. Varren stopped in the middle of the street, his head swimming. The open sky stretched above the city, huge and impossible. Elira noticed. First time in a surface city. He nodded once. Try not to stare upward too long. People will think you're drunk, lost, or planning to rob a roof. Varren looked at her. Is roof theft common here? Depends on the roof. A scream tore through the street ahead, and the crowd surged backward. Elira drew her sword. Varren's hands went to his blades, but Elira shot him a look, and he remembered the captain at the gate and left them sheathed. For now. At the center of the market square stood a small stone shrine holding 3 bronze bells, one for births, one for ships returning safely, one for the dead. All 3 were ringing. Beneath them stood a boy, hands clamped over his ears, screaming. He was perhaps 16, thin as a reed, wearing an apprentice's leather apron, and gold light poured from his eyes. His shadow stretched across the stones, not behind him but downward, as if something below the street had taken hold of it and was pulling. A priest in blue-gray robes rushed forward with a silver charm raised. "Child, listen to my voice." The boy turned, and the priest froze. When the boy spoke, his voice was older than the city. The gate remembers. The stones beneath the shrine cracked, and darkness opened below. Not a cellar, not a sewer, a shaft. The boy stepped toward it. "Stop him," Elira shouted. Varren moved, but the wolf was faster. It leapt across the square and slammed into the boy's side, knocking him away from the crack, and the gold light in his eyes flickered as his own voice broke through. "Help me." Then the shadow beneath him tightened and dragged him backward. Varren threw himself forward and caught the boy's wrist, pain ripping through his ribs, but he held on. The boy's skin was cold, too cold. Elira grabbed Varren's belt and pulled, and the wolf bit into the boy's coat and dug its claws into the stone, and for one impossible moment all of them strained together against the darkness beneath the street. Then Varren heard the whisper, "Blood of shadow. Come below." His pale blade flashed in his hand. He did not remember drawing it. He drove it into the stone beside the crack, and silver light burst along the broken street, and the shadow snapped like a cut rope. Varren, Elira the boy, and the wolf tumbled backward across the square. The bells stopped. Silence crashed down harder than the noise had. The boy lay shaking on the stones, his eyes brown again. Varren looked at his own blade, the pale metal still glowing faintly. Elira stood slowly. "You were told to keep those sheathed." Varren looked at the crack. Cold air rose from below, smelling of salt water and old stone. "I was also told not to let children be dragged into holes." Elira opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded once. "Fair." The crowd parted. Boots struck stone. A group of city guards entered the square, followed by 3 figures in long blue coats trimmed with silver thread. Counselors, Varren guessed. Surface nobles carried themselves differently than those below, but power had a smell of its own. The oldest of the 3 stepped forward, a man with a narrow face, white hair, and a silver bell-shaped pin fastened at his throat. His left hand rested on a black cane capped with ivory, though he did not lean on it, and when he looked at the cracked shrine his fingers tightened around the cane until the knuckles whitened. "Elira Wren," he said, Explain why there is an armed Shadowborn standing in my market square." Elira looked at the rescued boy, then at the cracked shrine, then at Varren. "Counselor Marrow," she said, "that may not be the most important question anymore." The counselor's gaze moved to Varren's glowing blade, then to the wolf, then to the crack in the stone. His face changed, only slightly, but Varren saw it. Recognition. Fear. The counselor knew something. Before anyone could speak, the deep bell rang again, and the crack beneath the shrine widened. Somewhere below Aurenfall, stone broke apart with a sound like a giant turning in its sleep. The wolf howled, and every bell in the city answered. And far beneath the market square, in the forgotten dark under the cliffs, something laughed, not loudly, not fully, just enough for Varren to hear. Just enough for him to understand that the road from Nyssara Deep had not led him away from danger. It had led him straight to its door. Counselor Marrow turned to the guards. "Close the square." Elira stepped closer to Varren. "Do you know what this is?" Varren looked down into the crack. The silver glow of his blade faded. But in the darkness below, a golden eye opened, and he felt it looking back at him. "No," he said. The eye blinked. The bell rang once more, and this time, from beneath the city, 1,000 buried voices whisper his name, Varren.